Hello and welcome to Armenian news network Groong, Week in Review. Before we begin, we appreciate your help in reaching a wider audience. So please don't forget to subscribe and like us on whatever platform you're using to listen to us. And spread the word by sharing this podcast on your social media channels. Thank you in advance. I'm 𝐀𝐬𝐿𝐿 𝐊𝐶𝐭𝐲𝐢𝐻, and this week, along with 𝐻𝐵𝐻 Bedrosyan, we're going to talk with our guests about the following major topics. Is it Adios Madrid? Armenia is questioning the Madrid principles on which Nagorno-Karabakh negotiations have been based for the last 20 years. The Diaspora Commissioner's new Repatriation Package and iGorts initiative. The status of Health Minister Adios Torosyan, who is in the middle of a 3-week vacation. Could this be Adios Torosyan? And an update on COVID and the evolution of the state of emergency into a state of quarantine in Armenia. My co-host 𝐻𝐵𝐻 Bedrosyan and I are joined by our resident panelists, 𝐻𝐵𝐻 𝐀𝐬𝐛𝐞𝐝, 𝐸𝐵𝐿 𝐆𝐷𝐻𝐿 and 𝑑𝐷𝐿 𝐆𝐷𝐻𝐿. 𝐻𝐵𝐻 𝐀𝐬𝐛𝐞𝐝 is a senior lecturer of political science and international relations at Bentley University in Massachusetts. 𝐸𝐵𝐿 𝐆𝐷𝐻𝐿 is a senior research fellow at USC's Institute of Armenian Studies, specializing in politics in the Caucasus, with special focus on Azerbaijan. 𝐷𝐷𝐿 𝐆𝐷𝐻𝐿 is an Armenian lawyer, security and privacy expert with over 20 years of experience in telecommunications, cyber law, and personal data protection. This past week, we recorded episode 12 of our podcast with David on judicial reforms, data protection, and privacy in Armenia, so be sure to check that out. For our first topic, we go to 𝐻𝐵𝐻 Bedrosyan.
Hello and welcome everyone.
Hello, 𝐻𝐵𝐻.
Hello.
This week, there were 4 major interviews and public statements that drew attention to the Nagorno-Karabakh negotiation process. Specifically, it seems that we're getting clear signals that Armenia wishes to change the format of the negotiation process, moving away from the Madrid principles, which have been the governing principles of the negotiations since 2002. So this week, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, in a speech in front of students, touched upon the issue by alluding that certain sides wish to change the negotiation process format, which was unadvisable from Russia's perspective. The Secretary of the National Security Council, Armen Grigoryan, in an interview with Factor TV, seems to have provided Armenia's official response to Lavrov, saying that many of the geopolitical realities on the ground have changed since 2002. He cited the April 2016 war, as well as the recent skirmishes on the Tavush border, as signs that a change is required. In Artsakh, President Arayik Harutyunyan harshly criticized the negotiation process, indicating that Artsakh should prepare for war in earnest. And Artsakh's foreign minister, Mazi Ismailyan, followed up on this, stating that the Madrid principles are no longer a topic of discussion in the Minsk group negotiations. 𝐸𝐵𝐿, can you give us a brief overview of the Madrid principles?
Hi. Madrid principles is sort of the current list of principles that are being discussed. They have not been formally agreed by either side, but it was a general sense that this is going to be the list of discussion topics for both sides. And it's always been a challenge to find that list of discussion topics that would be vague enough, but also concrete enough for both sides to kind of approach. And of course, Madrid principles are a continuation of previous efforts to find a solution to a very intractable problem where both Armenians and Azerbaijanis want to come away with Nagorno-Karabakh belonging to their side rather than the other. So over the years, there's been different ways to kind of go around the most contentious issues of status and either postpone their implementation or not even address them as part of the negotiations. It was clear from the get-go that Nikol Pashinyan could not accept Madrid principles. It was one of the points of criticism that he repeatedly made against Serge Sargsyan and also against former president of Armenia, Leon Ter-Petrosyan, who sort of supported Serge Sargsyan on that issue. If you remember, during the Sasna Tserer protests, it was a speech that Nikol Pashinyan gave, and he accused both Serge Sargsyan and Leon Ter-Petrosyan of coming into a conspiracy against the Republic of Armenia and in their support for Madrid principles. So it's clear that there was no way that he would agree to anything called Madrid principles, and that was communicated actually last year, and there was a pushback from the OSCE Minsk group saying that, well, we don't have any other substitute for this, so this is what we're discussing. And this is a recurrence again this year. Lavrov mentioned that Armenia basically wants something else, and Azerbaijan also wants something else.
But it seems that the Minsk Group co-chairs are pushing back on this, right?
Yeah, they've been trying to push back because I mean they need some kind of an agenda that's that would be a subject of their visit and the subject of a foreign ministers meeting or subject of presidential or leadership meeting, in this case, president, prime minister. But bottom line is, over the years, it's been very hard for both sides to come to any kind of joint statement, let alone concrete route to resolution. We look back. Last time there was a serious joint statement made when both sides signed on to was in 2008 with Serge Sargsyan and Ilham Aliyev, the so-called Meyendorff Declaration, where they pledged to resolve their differences without concretizing how they're going to resolve them. And then you had this kind of a joint declaration that happened between Ilham Aliyev and Nikol Pashinyan, sort of committing them to negotiation, committing them to ceasefire. But that's about it. So when you have a major ceasefire violation, major crisis like we had in Tavush and before that in April 2016, sides come back to try to sort of return to negotiations. But when they actually return to negotiations, it's clear that they're too far apart. They can't really come up with anything concrete other than, again, some small gestures like they had the exchange of sort of official journalists happening last year, or maybe exchange of prisoners, something along those lines.
So do you think all this then is just primarily posturing and a way of getting back around the table?
Yeah, it is primarily posturing, because it's clear that neither Russia nor United States nor European Union view this conflict as a priority of any kind. So they only return to it when there's some kind of a crisis happening, a security crisis happening normally, or if their agenda ever clears up, which I'm not sure if ever is going to happen. They kind of maybe put some screws on either side or both sides to try to bring them together to negotiations, as they tried to do, say, early on in the 90s and maybe around Key West time. But ever since Key West 2001 and to some extent Kazan 2011, this has been primarily about managing the ceasefire, making sure the ceasefire doesn't break down. That's the priority of the OSCE Minsk Group. But to maintain that priority, they also need some kind of negotiation track, which they would promote in parallel, because Azerbaijan's position is that we can't just have ceasefire. We want some territory back, at least something. And the Armenian position is that we're not going to give you any territory if threat of war is not removed from the table. And so there's this chicken and egg situation that they can't address.
Actually, Emil, I have a question. What do you think about Turkey's recent being more vocal and declaring itself as a party to the conflict? Do you think that was solely related to the Treaty of Sevres declaration by Armenia, or maybe even the July fighting, or is there something else going on?
No, there's something else going on. We have a much more activist Turkish foreign policy, which is coming on the back of very activist Russian foreign policy. Activist them in basically sending their troops across international borders, and you have a general breakdown of international order happening. And every major player is contributing to it in some way or another. Turkey is as well. Currently, Turkey has troops, basically violating, I don't know how many international borders, like 5 or 6. So the notion that Turkey might have a military presence in Azerbaijan is much more easily accepted, I think, as a possibility. And we have Russia try to sort of moderate that position by Turkey, reminding Turkey that it's part of the Minsk Group and takes on certain international obligations to maintain some distance from this conflict. But all bets are off really internationally, so we can expect Turkey to be more activist in the Karabakh conflict. We can expect Russia to be sort of more counter-activist in the Karabakh conflict, and we saw that after the July fighting, after the Turkish government, weeks before the Serv discussion, made clear that they want to, they will send, more technology, more support to Azerbaijan. And the next day, Russians started to fly in with their plane, bringing things into Armenia. So I mean, that's going to be much more of a sort of reminding the more of a sort of serious situation where you have basically Russia and Turkey playing major role.
Well, one thing I want to also add to what Emil said is that the fact that the statements by Turkey announcing that they're part of the conflict, they're considered to be part of the conflict, didn't come from Erdogan or even the foreign minister. It directly came from the defense minister. So I think the activism or the proactiveness and probably also the military component of that foreign policy is highlighted by that.
So this week, the Office of the High Commissioner for Diaspora Affairs made two announcements. The first one was that the office has submitted an integration package for the government to discuss and approve. And the second one was the announcement that 100 diasporan professionals have started working for various government agencies and ministries as part of the office's iGorts program. Asbed Kochigyan, what are your thoughts about these latest activities by the office?
My first reaction, especially with the repatriation package, is that probably it came on the heels of the firing and restructuring of the office. So I think that might have jolted the office in terms of being active, but also it's a reaction to what happened in Lebanon. But that being said, the iGorts towards work sort of program has been in the making for the last year or so. So I think there is a level of planning, but not necessarily deep planning, because within a month or so, the repatriation package that is being discussed or that is being submitted to the government's discussion and approval is again could have been a hodgepodge of ideas and concepts that have been being discussed, but then the explosion in Lebanon, in Beirut, and the situation in Syria accentuated this, basically making it more of a pressing issue to be discussed. One question I have about that on that repatriation package is that it is happening like most policies nowadays. It's actually balanced, that there is no public discussion about it. Or at least some kind of a sort of a hint as to what the issue is, or what are the policies and so on and so forth. So it's going to be like an ipso facto situation. Okay, the government decided this, they're going to put it into discussion, and then people are going to start arguing about it, debating what are the good sides, bad sides. In any kind of a context, any kind of a policy, public or otherwise, usually, and at the beginning of this current government's tenure, they did this. They would invite a discussion with civil society or shareholders or stakeholders who are in this issue, and then to integrate their ideas and then present it as a package for government approval or not, and then a discussion in the parliament, obviously. In terms of the other one, I think it has been the iGorts towards work, let's call it. I don't know if that would be the translation that they use, but I think that's a great idea, and it has been something that has been in the making. Although, again, the process of selection has been not transparent. Not that I'm accusing anyone of any issue. And then there's a lot of emphasis on names, the way it is the names where, okay, these experts, they had their education from Harvard or from Oxford or this. Great, these are great institutions, but doesn't make them the best experts on this. So I think there is an element of show offness, if I may say the word, but based on at least on the 24 or 25 of the people who are already in Armenia, and I followed some of their statements. I think they're capable, professional people, and I think this is one of the more valid, one of the more efficient, and one of the more professional approaches of trying to utilize the power or the capabilities of diasporan individuals to help in government and in professionalism of the government.
Thank you, Asbed.
Thank you.
This past week, Armenia's health minister Arsen Torosyan suddenly announced that he's going on a 3-week holiday. He was criticized heavily for taking a vacation during a pandemic. Due to the surprise nature of his announcement, there were also rumors of his impending resignation. Putting aside the fact that even government officials need to take a break, Torosyan's announcement was preceded by the fact that his personal Facebook account and his public page were shut down. leading to speculations that Torosyan might be on his way out. Torosyan has denied any friction with Prime Minister Pashinyan. Are social media accounts by Armenia's public figures considered public record? No doubt they are a major source of information on COVID in Armenia, and ministry employees must have spent time and resources working on it. Let's hear what David Sandukhyan thinks.
Thank you for the question, Havik. Armenian government, to my best knowledge, doesn't have any regulation or policy on how to open, close, and handle a official and non-official page. Apparently, all the pages from, let's say, media perspective, from public perspective, any page of politician is official. They are public persons, so saying this is the non-official page and this is the official page of the ministry, that doesn't make any sense. If you are a public figure, your all signs in social media and internet are official. Concerning this particular case, I think there is no formal regulation on what the ministry can do, delete page, or should every ministry be present in the Facebook or the Twitter. I think there is no such regulation. At least I haven't seen any public communication policy of the government. If it exists, it's probably non-written, non-official internal agreement about the members of government, and usually that kind of issues managed by public relation officers of the relevant ministry or official. The rumors are, we know probably, everybody knows probably the rumors that Torosyan's conversation over the Facebook messages have been caught by national security services that fortunately still play kind of the role of internal political intelligence in Armenia, and to great extent they serve to the interest of the governing elite or the first person of the country, as in many of post-Soviet countries. However, even if that happened, I think this is the obviously sign that something going wrong. It's either a conflict between Torosyan or Pashinyan, most likely. I think that most likely that's something with that.
So there are multiple rumors, but going back to my original question, would there be any legal remedy for the public? And I know there is no formal process, but would there be any legal remedy? Could I sue, for instance, the government to recover or uncover that all that information again?
Can I come in for just a second? I think maybe David answered this question, but just to make it more explicit, if you troll the Twitter space, for example, you'll see that the provincial accounts or municipal accounts around Turkey have a very top-down design. They all have a specific format that they follow, what they are, and they're passed on from governor to governor, from election to election. I am not aware of any kind of regulation or formality about the Facebook accounts where Armenians seem to be extremely active, right, David? Is there any kind of even informal formality to all these Facebook accounts that we take very seriously?
I think there is just agreement between, all public communication in Armenia, I mean the government public communication, coordinated by the office of the Prime Minister. So whatever done in that area probably agreed with, let's say, chief communication personalities. Let's say, we will not say they do it officially or they do it as a part of their job, but obviously it's coordinated to the great extent. I think it's managed by the personal communication officers or PR managers of the minister. Every minister has his own press secretary, or they are called themselves now public relations officers. Even in the government, every official has. Like, I was very surprised when I read about deputy prime ministers has their own public communication officer, and even head of staff of the government has his own public communication, which is okay. We may accept that because the Facebook is so important and all the governments present there. But I think there is no one regulation, formal or even non-formal, on how to design the page, what should be on the page. It's usually, from my experience of working with Armenian government, every minister has his own public relation officer, and he usually managed the whole communication with public. As about suing the Torosyan or ministry for deleting, destroying the information that have been on the page, I think there is no much chances for that. Even if there is, so okay, they say the page is gone, so we can do nothing. And if you need, there isn't a law on freedom of information law in Armenia that clearly defines what public, non-governmental organization, politicians, or just a person in Armenia may demand for. So you can request any information. There is an obligation to publish certain information, including like officials' names, top official names, contacts, information about the budget of the ministry, key projects, etc., on the official website of the ministry, or it could be also other public institutions. But there is nothing about social media. Yeah, so you can sue the government for not publishing certain information, but you cannot sue them for deleting Facebook, because Facebook is formally, at least formally, officially is not official channel for communication now.
All right, thanks. All right, so let's go on with an update on COVID in Armenia. The infection numbers in Armenia have dwindled down to 200 or close to 200 per day from a peak of over 700 a day back in July. Daily deaths have also gone down from the teens down to a handful each day, while recoveries have picked up. The current rate of test positivity is around 8%, which is down from 25% in July. But while the downward tendency in deaths and cases is great news, comparatively speaking, Armenia is still ranking high on the measure of new cases, for instance, per 1 million population. And I just did this real quick analysis last night, and it's, Armenia is number 13 if you count only the countries that have reported these new cases, new daily cases, which is most major countries. And we just, a few weeks ago, we talked with Hrant Mikhaelian in episode 8 about the real reason why these numbers may be going down. And this may be related to more of the seasonality of the virus. And now we see it picking up in different places of the world. So there is at least one theory that these reductions in numbers are related more towards that than. So in addition to the above, the overall issue, I think, continues to remain the low number of tests. And that's an issue this and in the following week because, we're able to manage about 1,700 tests per day, whereas Armenia needs to test 38,000 teachers in order to prepare for the start of a school season, which is September 15. And I don't know how they're going to do that when they've consistently shown that they can't go above like 2,000 seems to be the magic number of tests per day. Moving forward, in an effort to lift the state of emergency, there was a new law introduced this week and passed Parliament. And so the emergency situation is going to be replaced with the word quarantine. And they have a definition of it in the law. The vote was a straight down party line. I think all of the 𝐾𝐬𝐤 voted with 80 members and 0 opposition members voted for it. So it was another divided topic. David, we briefly touched about this on this during our interview yesterday, but what are your thoughts about this new quarantine law? What's the end goal in your opinion for the government, and how does this help the situation?
In general, it is logical to have such a law because the law Armenian government, also legal framework that Armenian government used for reduction or combating COVID was absolutely non-appropriate. I explained already in my Facebook many times, and I think we mentioned that yesterday, that state of emergency could be declared according to Article 120 of the Constitution of the Republic of Armenia only in one case, if there isn't a direct threat to constitutional order, which is COVID is not direct order from. It's difficult to imagine how the COVID can threat Armenian, endanger Armenian constitutional order. That's the one question that left for, let's say, future, maybe one day that will be discussed and maybe having legal consequences. apparently Armenia needed such an. I was very surprised. I never was interested. I never interested in a state of emergency legislation or that kind of pieces of the law. That's not my legal specialization. But when I open a law on extraordinary situations, it appeared that epidemics are not on the list of such emergency cases. The first things I read that law and was surprised there is no such a provision. So it had to be done, let's say 3 or 4 months ago. So they needed to amend that law far before September.
So the question that I have is, and I think that a lot of the public will also have, does this mean that the curtailment of civil rights, such as the freedom of assembly, is gone now with this new law?
Well, it's gone with the pandemic across the world, I would say. It's not only in Armenia. In Armenia, the danger, let's say, my concern about Armenia is that the country doesn't have strong democratic traditions. However, if such restriction happen in some other, let's say, well-established, developed, traditional Western democracies, there are some mitigation, maybe instruments such as that. Independent judiciary and center in Armenia, there is no. But my main concern how this law has been adopted. So the government did it in very quickly without public discussion. Okay, let's say, as I mentioned, in general, it's okay to have, it's necessary to have such a law. But when you go to the detail, there are many restrictions that had to be discussed prior to introduction of such a law. The law has been published on a public discussion web page. There is a special page for that for 2 weeks and adopted in 2 days after the publishing, which is, I think, not the appropriate way to adopt laws of that importance. I'm not speaking about many legal issues in the law or criminal, because it will take a lot of time. But there is many inconsistencies there.
If I may, I think David raised very interesting questions in terms of not in the case of Armenia, but also in the larger context of have there been any laws anywhere else in terms of dealing with pandemic issues? Or, I mean, there are laws definitely about public health where they were adjusted to fit into the larger pandemic issue. But also there is an element here of lexicon, right? Because the Constitution doesn't allow extraordinary measures. So now they're changing it to say quarantine. I haven't read it in detail. I'm not sure if this is sort of, again, a band-aid to solve the current issue, or it's a long-term thought about any other possible public health questions or issues that might appear down the line. And within this context, I think in terms of civil liberties, this is the biggest debate, right? Including in the United States. In Germany, recently, we witnessed this as people saying, we do not want the government to tell us to put a mask on because it curtails our freedoms. I know it's not the same case in Armenia, but the governments all around in the United States, some states in Canada, probably some territories, if not all, have been trying to, discourage people from public gatherings because that is the ultimate and the perfect situation for the pandemic to expand and more people to be influenced. So I think there is always this reactionary situation that they try to solve the issue of the public health by introducing special extraordinary measures. But then, as Ovik mentioned, it's not, or I think David mentioned that it's only in the case of the constitutional order is under threat, which raises a larger question. We have thought, we as individuals would think a lot about the laws, constitutions, how to protect it, and so on. But more often than not, we don't think about public health, and we're not as vigilant about public health and overall health of society in that context. These are just some of my thoughts. I mean, it's not a contradiction or a counter argument. It's just, I think, situated in the larger context.
And this is a great discussion, but I just want to quickly underscore, in the new quarantine law, there are still provisions to curtail freedom of assembly. It's not like the government cannot do this anymore. First of all, the government, as we discussed yesterday, I think the government did not cancel the previous rights it gave itself in order to still declare a state of emergency and curtail freedom of assembly, but also freedom of assembly can now be curtailed under this new quarantine law. And I think it can be done, from the news I read, it can be done globally, throughout the entire country, or even locally within municipalities. I don't know if you have read that part and what you think about that.
Well, hence this is the reaction, and I would let David talk about it more. But I think hence the reaction of people saying that this is an attempt by the government to become more authoritarian and so on. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Putting aside politicized perspectives and so on. I do believe that the government's aim, especially with that, is to make sure that people don't gather and creating a petri dish or an environment where it would be easier to be infected. But I would have put past them, as many people have reservations about governments. I wouldn't put past them that this is also an opportunity for them to curtail, opposition movements or possible opposition gatherings.
And I think the opposition had a lot of issues with that, didn't they, David?
Yes, but I think the main concern is that about mechanisms that may balance that, let's say, threat of suppressing opposition or public protest. The law actually is not that bad, I would say. The law foresees, not the law, but the package of laws foresees judicial appeal for such a regime. So if an individual or opposition or any organization, civil rights groups, concerned about the proportionality, adequacy of imposed measures by either government or regional municipal authorities, it may appeal in the court, and the court must resolve that appeal in 10 days, and plus another 10 days for entering into the force. So in 20 days, people may appeal such a restriction. But again, we come to the question of judiciary in Armenia. Whatever we are talking about, we will come to that question, because it's one of the major issues of Armenian society: independent and professional judiciary. I hardly can imagine a judge who will, let's say, repeal who will cancel or stop the decision of the government about of emergency, not because they are dependent on the government right now, just because it's an enormously big responsibility that most of the judge will not take in Armenia.
Right. I think the major concern with that, and also the local authorities, is that it leaves a lot of potential for politicization.
Yeah, I would say that local authorities in Armenia, they are fully government-driven, institutions.
And they will be even more in the future, right? Because parties are going to be able to assign, mayors and so forth.
Right. I wanted to briefly also mention one other difference in that, which we discussed yesterday with David, and that is about the electronic data collection on gathering and contact tracing and things like that, which in the state of emergency is possible. And yet with the current quarantine law, they are not planning to do that. And I think we briefly mentioned that whole program has not really worked as planned, and that is why they're giving it up.
Yes, I think that project failed from very beginning, and it failed not only in Armenia, in many countries, by the way. I think there isn't a few successful cases of contact tracing using the telephone application, etc. However, Armenian case, there are two major mainstreams, let's say, using the electronics on mobile application for tracking COVID spread. One is the centralized so-called China model, when the operators collect all where the operators push all the data to government-managed centralized system, and they process that and non-China model. Let's say I call it Singapore model because Singapore introduced it first. Now Google and Apple introduced the same let's say technology, even more advanced technologies that other governments can use. It's not centralized and user-driven. User data remains secure, etc. So I think that was the first mistake of Armenian government to go that way, the Chinese way. And it was not successful at all, I would say. That's why they probably give up, but they still keep that in the legislation. That's very surprising. That's either there are. I don't think that the government just forgot it.
Right?
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't believe in such things. So it's probably did in purpose just in case they will need it in the future. Which is also not appropriate because the way it was introduced was very untransparent. We didn't know how it processed it. We didn't know who controls. We didn't know how secure the data. We didn't know and still don't know how they will be. How they are going to destroy their data. We don't know how what the status of that data now.
Which they mentioned in the parliament that the data would be destroyed, but we have no way of knowing.
All that question have been asked in the past and no answer received.
Okay, well, that's the end of the show. But before we leave, I wanted to introduce a new tradition on our show, which is we ask all of our panelists to share one thing for about 1 minute maximum with our readers or listeners that you found interesting last week. It can be something completely unrelated to Armenia. It can be a book you've read. It can be an article. It can be an interview. Anything. So let's just start and go around the virtual room. Aspet Kochikian, how about let's start with you. What do you have for our listeners?
Well, it's completely egocentric interest and completely following my own likes and dislikes. But last week or so, I've been following the development of the Alexei Navalny case, where he was flown to Germany, and in the last couple of days, they announced that he was poisoned by a Russian nerve agent, Soviet-era Russian nerve agent, Novichok agent. And it was interesting for me, not the case itself, but interesting for me was to see the reactions by the Russian side as to official Russian side that no, when we checked him, there was no nerve agent in his blood or in his system. And even one of the chief toxicologists in Omsk region, where the situation started, at some point he even had this outlandish thing. Well, probably he fell sick because he didn't have breakfast. So I love these mundane and sort of off the dismissive aspect. But I will abuse my time. I think I still have a couple of seconds left. That another news that I've been following is actually in a galaxy far, far away. That recently they announced that the scientific community announced that there were two black holes that merge 7 billion light years away. And that we registered on Earth, we registered the gravitational waves here. It just, for me, it's an interesting thing in terms of how puny we are as individuals, as humans, where this is this mass cosmic things happening. But that's only me. It's also scientific breakthroughs in terms of questioning some of the theories that scientists have made. But that's what I've been following.
Sounds interesting. Emil, how about yourself?
Well, I can't beat the black holes there. It's parallel universes, maybe. But going back to the Navalny story, what piqued my interest was that Navalny's Navalny Live channel was being consulted by one of the chief toxicologists of Azerbaijan, who basically is a Azerbaijani government, Aliyev regime official. Who provided very professional opinion about how Navalny may have been poisoned, etc., and his condition, which tells me that there is some political background there. This one other thing that I watched was a documentary film produced by Channel 5, the Pro-Kocharyan TV channel in Armenia. It was focused on the Karabakh War and the creation of the State Defense Committee. And other than sort of the informational value of it, which was, I thought, pretty good as far as, bringing the story of the Karabakh War, which is, I think, largely still pretty unknown in Armenia, There's very superficial knowledge of the way the war went, etc. So other than that, I thought there was an interesting political messaging happening in that film. Aside from, of course, again, boosting Kocharyan and sort of reminding people of his the reason he became leader of Armenia, why he became leader of Armenia. There was also this sort of message to ex-president Leon Repatriation, where they talked about the disagreements that they had over 𝐾𝐬𝐿 and all those issues back in 1993. And basically, one of the speakers there, Boris Arushanyan, for the first time revealed that Repatriation was in on the planning around a month before 𝐾𝐬𝐿 was captured. And his position of caution was not, as normally is in Armenian politics, a treasonous position, which is, people like to accuse each other of treason in Armenia, but was a position, informed by sort of the concerns over Armenia's humanitarian situation, over foreign policy issues with Russia, etc. So it was an interesting message of reconciliation towards the Repatriation that I heard in a documentary produced primarily to boost Kocharyan.
Interesting. Yeah, that was an interesting documentary. I would also strongly recommend. David Sandukhjan, do you have anything for our readers or listeners?
I think it's not exactly the last week events. It's probably a couple of events, accumulated news that I think will define future of Armenian politics. I still in Armenian politics, no universes, no global things. I think now in Armenia, it's very interesting month and beginning of the new phase of Armenian politics. We have now three different poles, if the poles could be three, probably they usually two. We have three different political, let's say, streams. One is existing government, 𝐾𝐬𝐿 as a leading party of governing elite. Now we see two other major political forces shaped recently. One is 𝐵EVER, which is, I would say, more pro-nationalist, more pro. I wouldn't call them alt-right. They are not alt-right. They more, let's say, traditionalists. They are more, let's say, radical, maybe to some extent. So it's a political force that shaped around Sasna Tsarer, which is the now political force, and I think that will be one of the major competitors of the today ruling party on a right, or let's say nationalist field. Another political force was shaped around I think it's Dashnak mainly, to other political forces that is ironic of led by former national security chief Vanetyan and Bargavach, which is 𝐾𝐸𝐿 party, and I may call them revanchists. Let's say that's a group of people that try to get the power back, because the Dashnak and 𝐶ARUKyan have been in power, well, at first in coalition with the Republicans for a long time. And Vanetyan probably, I think, represents kind of rebranded Republican coalition. So we have now, at least we have now a more or less defined political field. In the past, there were many political parties, competing for leadership in a particular political segment, let's say left-right or centrist left, centrist right, etc. Now we have more or less clear vision. I think that's important, and that will define our future politics in Armenia.
And with that, this is our show. Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, our listeners.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
And that concludes our program for this episode of Groong Week in Review. We hope it has helped your understanding of some of the issues from this previous week. We look forward to your feedback and suggestions for issues to cover in greater depth. contact us on our website at groong.org, that's Groong, and on our Facebook page, ANN-Groong, or in our Facebook group, Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. I'm 𝐊𝐿𝐵𝐿 𝐀𝐻, and on behalf of everyone in this episode, I wish you a good week. Thank you for listening, and talk to you next week.